Episode 181 of CppCast with guest Isabella Muerte, recorded January 3rd, 2019. This episode of CppCast is sponsored by Backtrace, the turnkey debugging platform that helps you spend less time debugging and more time building. Get to the root cause quickly with detailed information at your fingertips. Start your free trial at backtrace.io/CppCast. In this episode, we talk about the progress C++ made in 2018. Then we talk to Isabella Muerte. Izzy talks to us about the multiple papers she presented at the last ISO meeting and her thoughts on merged modules. Welcome to episode 181 of CppCast, the first podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. I'm your host, Rob Irving, joined by my co-host, Jason Turner. Jason, how you doing today?
Hi, Rob. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Happy 2019.
Yes, 2019, and I still don't have my flying car.
No, I don't think we're going to get those anytime soon. Well, Elon Musk wants to make underground cars instead of flying cars. That's apparently
the exact opposite of what I'm looking for.
I could see how it might make more sense, though. I mean, car accidents happening the way they are now. Just imagine a car accident where it's flying, 20 stories above your head. That'd be a lot of chaos.
It'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, at the top of our episode, I'd like to read a piece of feedback. We got this email, which is very topical, from Michael. And he references this article and a bunch of Twitter discussion that's been going on lately, saying the viewpoints expressed in Iris's article and by the angry game dev mob on Twitter are not some kind of fringe minority in games. It would probably be healthy for the community to have a discussion about it in a friendly setting like CppCast, and maybe you can convince him to attend some standards meetings. And he put in contact info for the author of this article, as well as a couple other game developers, I guess, who have been vocal in this online discussion. And I think I'm going to introduce our guest for the week first before we start talking more about this, because I think she will have some opinions on this as well.
Okie doke.
Okay, so joining us today is Isabella Muerte. Isabella is a C++ Bruja, build system titan, and open source advocate. She cares deeply about improving the workflow and debugging experience of the C++ community currently has, and is designing and implementing an experimental next-generation build system called Coven, based on ideas mentioned in her CppCon 2017 talk. There will be build systems, while also simultaneously ripping CMake apart and putting it back together again with a library titled IXM. She recently launched Aliasa.io, a small URL routing service intended for a CMake fetch content module. She enjoys playing Destiny 2, acquiring tattoos, and is currently trying to master the 5 elements of earth, wind, water, fire, and gun, but she makes no promises. She bows to no entity but the terrifying eldritch daystar we call the sun, and hopes to one day own 2 German shepherds named Rip and Tear. Izzy, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be back. Thanks for having me.
It's quite a bio.
That is quite a bio.
I was bored at 5 a.m, so I figured I'd write it up. Spin it up some more.
Do you currently have any dogs?
I don't. I live in an apartment that doesn't permit any pets whatsoever. So.
Any pets whatsoever, so not even a turtle?
No, not even a turtle. We had rats in the attic recently, though. So that was...
Oh, that's kind of like having a pet.
It's like having a pet, except that it pees everywhere and it smells terrible. And then they die in the attic. And then, yeah, it's real cool. It's not.
Yeah, doesn't sound fun.
Yeah. Anyways.
Okay. Well, we got a couple news articles to discuss. So let's start off with this one. So it's titled Modern C Lamentations. And I guess it was started off as a response to this developer's looking into the ranges blog post by Eric Niebler.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of picked apart Eric Niebler's example with Pythagorean triples. And I don't know, I want to see what everyone else's take on this. Maybe it's just not the best example of using ranges. I don't know.
It really is not, in my opinion. Like, just from a performance, perspective, like ranges are basically LINQ for C++, but they have the potential to be a lot faster and to be like, look what I can do with this math thing. It doesn't really matter much in my opinion because, like a game developer is not going to do that when they need to have, in some cases sub 16 millisecond execution times. And, it's like a neat example, but at the same time, it's an example and not indicative, I think, of real world code. It's kind of like the original calendar example that Eric showed off a couple years back. Really cool to like to show off, but we're also not getting zip in ranges for C++20, so he can't really show that example off right now. But I think that a better thing to have done would have been like, okay, we're gonna use Boost ASIO and like get a bunch of information from GitHub, and then we'll just munge that through a massive range pipeline. I think that would have been a much better example, in my opinion.
Well, even disregarding the performance complaints, like the amount of boilerplate that this example required for his maybe view interface.
Yeah.
And I'm reading this and I'm like, is this C++? Because it's using C++ 20's templated Lambda syntax, which I'm not used to reading yet.
Yeah.
and part of it, I'm like, I don't even understand why are these opening brackets here? Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I thought was interesting in the article is he, points out some alternative ways to make this code even better, including one that's just kind of like a straight C way. But he also points out that, coroutines being used in other languages is a great way to do it. And maybe he wasn't aware that we are hopefully getting coroutines with C++20, but that's definitely another much more straightforward example to do this type of code.
Based off of San Diego and soon to be Kona. We'll see what happens.
I know there's been lots of back and forth on coroutines. Is the version that we may get an allocating or non-allocating or whatever that argument was?
I can't even tell anymore. Apparently there might be even a third implementation at Kona based off of a brief conversation at the closing plenary. I really wish I had the brain matter to have been paying attention at that point, considering it was my first meeting attending. But briefly, to just go back on the ranges thing too, a lot of people were complaining about the compile time stuff, and one thing a lot of people don't know is that you can just pass -f compile time report to GCC and Clang and get that information out. And I ran into this a couple years back when I was trying to check compile times of a Boost variant drop-in that I had implemented when I was at Apple. And I found that most of the time that is spent with Boost is just parsing headers. In a 2.75 compile time, 2.65 of that is spent just reading those headers in, including Boost variant is 376 headers every time, even on Clang. Whereas one 2,000 line file is going to do you in under 0.08 seconds or whatever. That's if that's averaged over a million compiles over the course of several days. But it's the compile time performance I think is a problem with the current ranges implementation. But anyways,
there's a lot of complex machinery in it.
A lot of it's also split up into here's a single file for this one function, and I think that's problematic. So. It's a very Boost way to approach things. It's great for modularity because you can then just delete that stuff later or just not include it, but that's not what typically ends up happening.
So I'm curious if, in your experimentation, if you tried to see if PCH did or did not help in that kind of situation.
It really doesn't matter if we want PCH to work or not because Cotire barely works with CMake. CMake doesn't support PCH still. The only build system out there that really does is Meson, and only supports it to one single PCH for your entire project, as opposed to on a per module basis, which GCC and Clang support. So the precompiled performance of it doesn't really matter in my opinion. The Clang module map stuff lets you automatically get that as a free operation, but it's still it's not really well documented. You have to look at the source code for Clang, and that's several hours of your day lost just so you could see is this faster than just not caring. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, before we move on, is there anything else worth mentioning with this game dev Twitter rant that's been going on? I haven't been following it much. I just read this article.
So having worked in the games industry for a brief period there, I ended up burning out because I was working 100 hours a week on a regular basis, which, I recommend people not do. Stand up for yourself. Maybe join a union. Who knows? The thing that I noticed is that there are a lot of workflows that people have gotten used to, and they don't want to spend time looking outside of their existing workflow to see what is available. I will admit that debugging on a release build is not great, but the JavaScript people have solved that with source maps. We don't have that with our debuggers at the moment. And I think right now our only saving grace is the fact that debugging C++ is actually a much nicer experience than it is debugging, say, Rust. But that is a gap that is closing every day.
That's just because of the tools available for Rust.
It's more of just like GDB and LLDB are built for C++ and C, right? And so they have to do a whole bunch of stuff to work around it. They have to do these hacks where they're like, embedding Python script names that are located inside the, cargo directory so that it will run those Python scripts when it loads up the executable. And then they'll have it's a whole mess. And I feel for the people that have to work on that because I've tried to do stuff like that for like early Coven implementations. But we could be doing a lot better, to say the least. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, the next article I had was from Bartek's blog, and this is C++ at the end of 2018. And it's really just a list of kind of all the updates and the state of the C++ ecosystem as from the end of the year. And it's looking pretty good. C++ 20 is looking pretty strong from my point of view, I'd say. And 2017 adoption has been going pretty well.
Yeah. It's been interesting having the chance to finally go to a standards meeting and getting to see just like the massive amount of work that goes into it. Granted, I didn't really help matters much by submitting 6% of the papers submitted on the last the last mailing, not the post mailing, but the pre mailing. So that got some eyebrows raised. So my name was also on.
How many papers was that to make it 6%?
So it was 274 papers total, and I wrote 17. It would have been 18, but the PhD was kind enough to pick up the slack for the no discarded with a reason paper, and then my name was attached to 3 others as well, just because I'd been involved with them for a while, and they were also relevant to stuff that I'd been working on. This was also me catching up for the last like 4 years of like not really being able to participate and mental health stuff and other stuff like that. So,
right,
yeah.
It's a lot of papers.
A lot of papers, yeah. There's if you look at the mailing, you'll just scroll down, and at some point it's just my name, like 12 times in a row. Small little break, 5 more papers for me. So I've got more papers to submit for Kona too. So I'm sure. So you have to contact Hal Finkel to get numbers. I'm sure he's going to raise his eyebrows when if he hears this and when he sees my email requesting the number of papers that I'm going to be submitting. So. Yeah, and I wrote most of those papers also in a weekend, which shocked a lot of people. But
one weekend, not 1 weekend per paper?
Not 1 weekend per paper. Like in a 48-hour period, I wrote all those papers, minus P0468, which is the retain pointer. That was instead a conversion from restructured text to bike shed, so that took a bit longer. And I still had 8 hours of sleep every night, so I wasn't like just working nonstop the whole time. I was taking breaks and whatnot. I just had a free weekend to burn with nothing to do, so I was like, I'll just write some papers and see what happens. And then I just kept finishing papers, and I was like, uh-oh.
So did you end up with like a template or something to help you get started on the next paper so that you like just filled in the bits or what?
Yeah, I would just copy paste the preamble of the previous header or the previous bike shed file to the next one, but then that was about it. I think I spent like an hour writing a small little script in PowerShell to just like dump them off of the bike shed online website, so I don't have to have some like special weird xargs thing that runs curl and all this other stuff. So it ended up being pretty useful. And people can get that off of my GitHub, so you can see all like the progress I'm making and papers that I'm working on and whatnot, as well as all the terrible pun titles that I'm writing. So,
All right.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you guys wanted to point out from this article before we move on? Because we'll definitely ask more about the papers you submitted at San Diego.
Well, I wanted to mention just the number of conferences mentioned on here and his timeline. ACCU, C++ Now, CppCon, Code Dive, and that's not all of them, and it's growing each year. Looking forward to what we've got coming up. We've got 2 new conferences, at least in 2019.
Yeah, we've got, C++ on C, and then...
Core C++.
Yeah.
Which I am officially going to both of them now.
Oh,
yes.
Congratulations.
Wow. Yeah, if you include the C++ committee meetings, which are on this list, there's something going on every single month almost. It looks like there's gaps in the schedule in August and October, but that's a lot of conferences. Yeah.
Well, and this year, let's see, when is Kona?
Kona is in February.
Oh, Kona's in February, right. So Kona and C++ on C kind of overlap, and then C++ Now and Core C++ kind of overlap this year. It's there's going to be multiple things per month on the calendar for 2019.
Fun stuff.
That's 19.
Yeah, for 19.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, since you just name dropped the PhD a moment ago, Izzy, this other article I have is getting you there, your C++ standardization efforts in 2019. And this is a good post. It's kind of targeting people who are interested in writing and submitting their own papers, which probably would have been a helpful read for you maybe a month or two ago, right?
So we were actually communicating over Discord. Actually, while we started the podcast, he just pinged me on Discord. So we were actually communicating back and forth both through DMs as well as in the established channel for Include CPP Next, where we discussed future stuff for the standard, and then we would paste our early drafts, and people would point out typos or something like that, and we would fix them up. So it was a lot of collaboration and kind of a very back and forth effort between the two of us. I think he wrote the second most papers fresh for San Diego, and then was also burned out at the end of it. And he was like, "I don't know how you did that," and I was like, "I have ADD meds, it's a good post, especially because if you're worried about travel, it goes into how you can actually get sponsorship for that. I was at the time working for Target for the San Diego meeting. Unfortunately, I was terminated 4 days after the meeting ended. That's a whole other story, but yeah, so I was able to actually go and represent someone and their interests, which was interesting as well. And it was being able to have someone pay for me helped a lot. But for Kona, I'm going to be paying my own way in this case. So.
Right, and if you're not going with a company, this article is highlighting that you can apply to get assistance in order to cover travel costs and everything, right?
Yes, yeah. However, my birthday is actually that Friday for Kona, so I'm going to be turning 30 the day before the plenary vote. So I'm going to be staying an extra week in Hawaii for a vacation and birthday present for myself because it's Hawaii. Come on! Yeah. I'm gonna be in a room without windows for 7 days. Let's look at the sun a little bit or something.
Well, at the same time of year, approximately, I'll be in sunny, warm southern England in February. Yeah, that doesn't add up in the same way, does it?
No, it doesn't. No. San Diego was very sunny, and it made me realize how much I missed Southern California's weather compared to the Bay Area. It gets way too cloudy up here, and it really does affect my mood and whatnot. I was down there, I was in my element. It was 90 degrees in the middle of November. Everyone else was just like, this is not right, and I was just like, no, this is perfectly natural. I'm fine with this. So,
well, you've mentioned the Include C++ Discord a couple times,
yes.
And I think it's been a while since we've talked about it on the show. So if you want to give it a quick plug, by all means.
Yeah, so I'm actually a moderator for the Include CPP Discord. We're basically just a group of people who wanted to make a more inclusive community for C++. I wasn't actually planning to do a spiel for them. So best way to find out more about them is to go to include.cpp.org or maybe include-cpp.org. I actually need to check. I'm sure you can put it in the show notes though. Myself, various other people in the C++ community, Simon Brand, Nicole Mizuka, Yubi-san, the PhD, Matt Godbolt, various other people. We all just kind of chill in there, help out new people. It's a very warm, friendly, inviting group, and as long as you follow our code of conduct, like everything's chill. So,
and I think we've had every single person you just mentioned as a guest on the show.
Yes,
so.
that was on purpose.
Okay, and last article I have to go over real briefly before we start talking more about San Diego and everything. The Visual Studio IntelliCode is adding support for C++.
Yeah.
I don't think we've talked about this IntelliCode feature, but it basically is like, machine learning applied to like GitHub repos and everything to help you type out code. So when you're typing something, it'll come up with suggestions based on, other code people have written. And it's also mentioning here, I think just for C# so far, that you can actually have it learn your own code base. So if you have a whole bunch of, custom classes and methods that you want it to be knowledgeable about, it can do that as well. Which is pretty cool.
I find that terrifying because like all it's going to take is for someone to game that system so that when you go to type the word color, it's going to, like if you're in the UK, it's going to use the American spelling, and if you're in the US, it's going to use, the non-American spelling, and it's just going to be real great. Like I'm sure someone out there is going to like try to like write a SI unit tool, and it's going to just suddenly like start dumping in feet and miles and Fahrenheit and just let's do it. Like I can't wait.
Well, I feel like this takes like programming from Stack Overflow searches to the next level, basically.
I mean, isn't that a bunch of tools that people have written where it's like you can write a function, and if it can't find it, it tries to find it through Stack Overflow, and then it just goes through every single answer until it compiles, and then just like downloads that and dumps that into your code.
Yeah, I think I saw something about that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a thing. It's like a Python import hook. So
it's great.
Yeah, fun stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as we mentioned, so we've done 2 recent episodes covering the ISO San Diego meeting.
Yes.
But it'd be interesting to get your perspective since you were there as a new member, and as you mentioned, you wrote over a dozen proposals. So, what was your take on San Diego? How did it go?
It was exhausting. One thing I noticed that people have not mentioned at all was the hotel we stayed in. So it was it felt kind of like run down, and also like not, this isn't me like dumping on the hotel, but I got whiplash when I walked in because it had on a wall you just had Ron Burgundy's face with the text "Stay classy, San Diego," and I just had like whiplash. Like, is this real? Am I having a stroke? And like no one's talked about this at all, and like I'm just like concerned that like I imagined the whole thing, but no, it's a real thing. And so just like I feel like that set the mood for me for the weekend. I was like, oh, this is going to be just a trip. So it was really great. I was all over the place because I had 17 papers that had to go from SG1 to SG16. A little bit of SG14 stuff was mentioned, but I didn't even get to go to those sessions. I was in LWG, or not LWG, LEWG, EWG mostly, outside of the incubators. I was in the incubators a lot because I wrote so many papers, and they were just like, no, like you need to get past us for this stuff. So I was all over the place because I wrote so many. So I now have like a very good handle on like the various like each working group has a different focus. I've noticed like EWG is very like this should be like a language feature, but if we can really just like if it's controversial, people are going to try to push it off to the library. So like they keep that open as an option. LEWG, they have a very specific approach to like the chair is not very fond of multiple namespaces. I disagree with that on a great many levels. But like people in EWG are in favor of inline namespaces, people in LEWG are not. So there's like some clashes there, and having to come to that compromise is interesting. And then I also got to sit in core for a little bit, and that was actually quite interesting. It was like a nice for me at least, chill session. Noticed a few typos in the merged modules paper, which will be presented at Kona as well. And I was actually so busy that at one point a paper that I had written was reviewed by LEWG while I was in another room discussing another paper that I wrote, and that paper got forwarded without any arguments from me to LWG for Kona. So I don't know if that's like a first to have like an R0 get sent to LWG and the author's not in the room, but is present at the at the meeting. And so that was for the integer width literals, and that's so that we can write, one I64, one U8, that kind of a thing. And that just
does that include the size T also?
So size T and pointer diff T are actually language level, and that's that was written by the PhD. So that's his paper. I was like, okay, so cstd-int is part of the standard. This should be a library level thing. I actually would like it to be. I think that there's no reason why we can't have the uint _ least. I made a mistake in the paper and was just like, so let me back up. The integer with literals paper is to replace the U64 _ C macros that have been in cstd-int for years, and those return the uint _ least _ value. Uint _ least 64 or whatever the n is _t.
So that's the smallest possible integer that can hold that value.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay.
Which, if you're on a platform that provides the uint 64t, it's the same type typically.
Right.
I think that's actually required. Like that, if they are provided, they have to be exactly the same. But I don't believe. I need to go back and check. But regardless, that's what those macros return. My paper does not specify that. Instead, specifies these just aren't available if you don't have uint8t and friends. So I briefly threw a thing out on Twitter a couple days ago, and a bunch of people came back and said, "Yeah, you should just change it." And I was like, "Okay." So that's going to be in the R1 for Kona. Personally, I would love to have those actually be built into the language instead of having them be, just like something they have to include. And so, like Rust, they have I64, I8. U8, all these things, those are guaranteed to be those widths, but then Rust also doesn't run on ZOS or platforms where, char is 32 bits. So, that's kind of why we have to have those, and that's fine. But I would love to have those actually as types built into the language. And from what I've seen, even in the game dev world, people will typically not actually use U64 as the lowercase. They'll actually use it as the uppercase form, so it'll be like capital U64 instead of a lowercase U64. So I would want to do a search like through GitHub, but it's a little hard to do that at the moment. There's no like massive search engine available. Maybe Bing will be available one day. I don't know, given the Microsoft purchase. But but yes, that's what that paper is, and I think there was like a few people that were like, this like kind of interferes with something with Visual Studio, but like we're not worried about it. Like it's an implementation defined thing. No one uses it. We're good. So, and then the other paper that got forwarded to LWG as well was byte swap. So if all goes well, we're finally going to get a const expr byte swap function in C++20 after who knows how many years of not having a byte swap function. I don't know why it was so hard for us to get this in. I know that some people were trying to like focus on it for networking. I chose the approach of like, well, what if I'm just trying to read bytes that were written by a big endian platform to a file? Like I don't care about networking in that case. So it just works on bytes, it just works on integers that are available and built into the language, and you just swap bytes, and that's it. That's all it does. So there's some people that said like, oh, you need to do it the Rob Pike way, where you're working with std byte arrays, but those are not const expr, and you can't create an integer out of them, at least easily. So I chose the simplest route, and let's just standardize byte swap. Even Arduinos have had it as a built-in instruction intrinsic since 2008. So
what are they? Are they like big endian to little endian, or is it just byte swap and you don't care? It's just going to do the opposite order.
Byte swap, you don't care, and we're also getting std endian in C++20. So if you want to implement H to N and N to H, you can do that yourself. That is not my problem. Some people might want that to be added to the paper. They can write their own proposal.
Right. Yeah, I'm just thinking about emulator that I worked on recently,
Yes.
where I just need it always to be in Little Endian when I'm talking to the emulator or whatever,
Yeah,
and then
Yep, pretty much. That's what you can do with this, and it's const expert too. So const expert all those things. So,
right,
Yeah.
as one does.
Yeah. I actually here. Let me just open my browser real quick here. I'm trying to get to my paper list.
Well, by the time you
sure.
wrote 20 or whatever, it'd be hard to keep track of them all.
Right. Which is why. So on my GitHub, which I believe I sent you a link to, Rob, so you can put that in the show notes. I have a massive table of just like where they currently are, the current papers and whatnot for C++ 20. So yeah, it's actually one moment. I need to move this out of the way so I can still see you all on the on the screen. So yeah. So do you just want me to go through all of them real quick, like rapid fire, to discuss like which ones moved forward and where we're at with some of them, or do you want to hone in on any specific ones?
So I guess we just discussed the two that you said did move forward, right?
So they moved forward to LWG. So those are the ones that have moved
out of the incubators.
They weren't even sent to the incubators. They were actually sent to LEWG first. So the ones that moved out of EWGI and LEWGI. Let's see here. So Intrusive Smart Pointer finally was sent to LEWG at one point, kicked back down to LEWGI, moved back out to LEWG. It has to undergo some API discussion stuff, unfortunately, and that is just for bike shedding some API stuff. There's going to be a big argument over whether we should adopt by default or retain by default. This is the Intrusive Smart Pointer retain versus release, or not release. Sorry, retain versus adopt on construction. I'm in the opinion that having worked with 30 C APIs and the factories that they involve, like you want to adopt when you're constructing it, and if not, then you're just going to be incrementing.
So I don't really understand what the use case is, or know what the use case is for an intrusive smart pointer.
Right. So there's actually quite a few. So in the standards library, we currently have, besides shared pointers control block, we actually have two for sure intrusive smart pointer count types. The first is exception pointer, which cannot be implemented with shared pointer. It has to be implemented as a intrusive smart pointer count. It's also opaque. That could be implemented with retain pointer. And then there's also std feature and std promise. They have a shared block as well, and that can also be implemented in that sense. This entire
So the intrusive part is the control block, basically, the count.
Technically, yeah. So an intrusive smart pointer count is just, it's like shared pointer, except that the object itself has control over its own lifetime. So if you've ever worked with DirectX, Objective-C, Python, OpenCL, some parts of the MonoC runtime, like MRuby, there's a whole bunch of stuff that if it's got a ref and deref or increment and decrement, it's a retain, it's an intrusive smart pointer count capable.
Okay.
So retain pointer came about because I had in 2016 I was at CppCon. I was at Gore's really fantastic coroutines talk where he showed here it is running an LLVM, and also I'm on Linux and I'm using Visual Studio Code, and check out all this crazy stuff I'm doing right here. And this just got inlined. And then he was showing off some data types, and I was like, wait, intrusive pointer. Well, I've been working on this thing for 3 months now on the side. Because I was currently trying to see could I unify running Python and Objective-C together without having to write Objective-C or Objective-C++. The answer, by the way, is yes. That's a long-standing library that I've been working on for a long time. I'm basically waiting for reflection at this point. But and I just was SG14's tomorrow. What if I just write this as a small paper? So I wrote it overnight. Went into SG14 the next morning on that Wednesday and was like, hey, I have this really important paper. I wrote it last night. This is going to take 15 minutes of your time. I ended up going a little over that, which ended up causing the person that was supposed to go first to lose out on time, which I feel bad about. But I wasn't really mentally present with all of that. I was just look at this paper. It's really important. And most hands in the room went up. I think one person's hand did not, but no one was against it moving forward. I presented it again with some changes at SG14 in CppCon, this past year, in 2018, and Arvid Gersman came up to me and was like, "Hey, I've implemented this 6 times in my source code, and I can replace it actually in every case with this implementation that you have." So I don't know if he's actually using mine, but it's it has a use. And if Arvid Gersman is like, "Hey, this thing that you wrote is useful," it's probably useful. So there's just some arguments over whether it needs to not increment the reference count when you pass a pointer to it, or automatically do that. Currently, I provide a traits type as a customization point, and my argument is if you don't override that, it adopts by default, and you have to retain on copy or explicitly retain. And in practice, I have not actually had to do retain by default. Everything is always created with a ref count of 1 when it's allocated. And while some people can argue that, but what if I'm creating this object with a ref count of 0? It's not really you don't want to do that and then place it on the stack and then copy it to something else. It's there's a few edge cases, but those are you can just specialize for those. So what may end up happening though, and this is a very low chance of it happening, but it could happen, where we end up with both a retain pointer and an adopt pointer. And that is something that I'm going to ask as a straw poll for in Kona. But we'll see what happens. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then let's see what else. A big thing that happened with SG16 was the Desert Sessions paper, which is to add a std environment, std arguments type to the standard. So in every language except C and C++, you can iterate over the environment variables that are in your your program's running session, hence the name session. And you can also get the arguments from anywhere in your program, forever. And those arguments don't change. Technically they can, but also...
Yeah, technically they can.
Technically they can, but in every other language they're considered immutable. So, there's no reason why we can't also say, copy these over or make a view of them or something similar. This is kind of an evolution of adding a new signature for main, which was to add std initializer list, std string, or string view, or something similar like that. And that just came about because I had made a tweet and then someone submitted that as a paper, and I was like, oh gosh, I hope I didn't influence that because that paper got eviscerated. It turns out that they had not seen my tweet. They had come up with it separately, but it's good to know that there are other people that are going down that path. But I want the Sessions API to be UTF-8 safe, and I want it to be UTF-8 by default, and we don't have those available right now in the standard, and so that ended up basically it's waiting on SG16. However, someone named Pedro Rodriguez on GitHub submitted a pull request about a month and a half ago. I haven't responded to the guy because I'm just in awe because he keeps submitting changes and whatnot to his pull request, but he implemented the entire paper, and it looks like he's only been programming for 2 years. It's incredible that he was able to implement it, and also to implement it in a fairly Unicode safe way. It doesn't work for ZOS and stuff like that, so that we are going to require some transcoding and stuff like that. But as an initial hey, this is implement, this can be implemented. It's really impressive, especially that someone who is not been in the C++ muck for as long as the three of us have, to do that so quickly is really, really fantastic. I think that is proof that it is a good idea at the very least. So and then let's see off the top of my head here, we also had a offset of for the modern era that didn't get presented yet. That was for some people say might step on the reflection API stuff. I disagree with that because the whole point is that you pass a member function pointer to the function. So if you stored it as a non-const expr variable, you can't reflect on that. So there's really no point in making it it's in the realm of const expr, the reflection API. Although I want it to be const expr. And then a bunch of people said you need to ask David from EDG if it's possible. He came back and said yes, it is. So that may be in 20, maybe in 23. Really don't know. It hasn't been presented yet though, but a lot of people seemed positive about it. And let's see here. Oh yeah, let's talk about the one paper that got absolutely 100% rejected with like.
Okay, yeah, that sounds
no
great.
one voted in favor of it. So P1305, which had a typo in the title, which is very unfortunate. It was deprecate the address of operator is the title. It was supposed to be deprecate overloading the address of operator, but that's what happens when you write 17 papers in 48 hours. You get tired and you forget to fix the title when you send the email into Hal. So Attila from I want to say Hungary. If not, then I apologize, Attila, for messing up your home country. But he had pointed out, this could just be done with a concept, and I was like, that's a pretty good point. So
Could be done with a what? I'm sorry.
A concept. Yeah. So you can have a concept that says like, you can't overload the address of operator in these APIs. That's all.
Okay.
That solves the same problem. And I was like, oh yeah. So when the hands went up, I voted neutral on my own paper. And everyone was against or strongly against it. So it's been put to bed now. EWG is not going to get rid of the address of operator overloading anytime soon, and we'll just have to get used to it. So,
that's one of those things that's basically impossible to get right?
Not really. I mean, like it depends on like what you're using it for. And like it had a use case. It's not used that often.
Okay.
The one thing that
this is the unary ampersand, technically.
Correct. Yeah, and there's only two really well-known libraries out there that use it that are available to the public. The first is Microsoft's COM pointer, which I should note, retain pointer in conjunction with out pointer from the PhD supersedes, as well as Boost Spirit 3. So,
of course, Spirit does. If it can be overloaded, Boost Spirit has done it.
Yes, it has. So it was unfortunate, but that's where we ended up. Let's see here. Another paper that got rejected was inline module partitions, but that's going to be refocused to combine it with the feature presentations paper. And if you don't know what those are, it just means it's going to be used for conditional imports and not conditional imports, for conditional scopes of stuff. So it's going to be a global static if, basically, is what I'm going to treat it as going forward. Didn't get to present the workflow operators, which would solve some precedent stuff for ranges, coroutines, executors. Basically, anytime that it basically becomes like an infix operator without it actually being an infix operator. So that didn't get presented, unfortunately. So we may have to wait till 23, which I was hoping to avoid, but we'll see what happens. Again, everything's kind of malleable. Because I got the paper in at San Diego, technically it can still be presented and possibly make it in 20. I don't know, though. Someone will probably say that I'm wrong. And that's okay. Let's see here. Void main actually got some... so P1276 of void main, making it so that void can have a void return type. I actually got some decent feedback from EWGI. The only reason it didn't move forward is because of modular main, and that is from Richard Smith. So that paper specifically is like we treat main as this special like little boy, where it's like, okay, it can return int, but then it doesn't actually. You don't have to actually put a return there, and there's a bunch of there's all this special wording there that just says like. If it falls off the end, it'll just act like you return 0. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And then you just call std exit 0 at the end of it. It's like, well, then why don't we just do that with a void main? Like every language in the world has void as the return type. Main doesn't actually return anything. Exit does. Like when you return that value from main, it's actually going to be setting that value to some variable, and then it calls std exit at the very, very end of that. And if you call std exit before that, then that's when all that other special logic comes into play. But like, there's no real point to it, if that makes sense. But it may get combined with modular main, and then we can backport it to what's known now as either legacy or classic C++.
Do you know modular? What does modular main accomplish?
Modular main basically says that you can have multiple main entry points for a module, if I'm remembering correctly. This is not in merged modules, which we said that we were going to discuss. So it's also being rewritten for Kona, so I would wait for the pre-mailing and then read that paper.
Okay.
Because I believe Richard is going to try to integrate some of void main's wording into it, but that's neither here nor there, in my opinion.
I wanted to interrupt this discussion for just a moment to bring you a word from our sponsors. Backtrace is a debugging platform that improves software quality, reliability, and support by bringing deep introspection and automation throughout the software error lifecycle. Spend less time debugging and reduce your mean time to resolution by using the first and only platform to combine symbolic debugging, error aggregation, and state analysis. At the time of error, Backtrace jumps into action, capturing detailed dumps of application and environmental state. Backtrace then performs automated analysis on process memory and executable code to classify errors and highlight important signals such as heap corruption, malware, and much more. This data is aggregated and archived in a centralized object store, providing your team a single system to investigate errors across your environments. Join industry leaders like Fastly, Message Systems, and AppNexus that use Backtrace to modernize their debugging infrastructure. It's free to try, minutes to set up, fully featured with no commitment necessary. Check them out at backtrace.io/CppCast.
I was going to say, looking at the time where we are in the interview here, it might make sense to just take this as a segue to talk about modules.
Yes. So let's talk about modules. A lot has changed since last year when I wrote my Millennials Are Killing the Modules TS blog post, where I was very
last
angry.
time we had you on the show was mostly to let you voice your complaints about modules, right?
I voiced my complaints, and it turned into an hour-long stream of consciousness with no editing whatsoever. I'm glad that this time I didn't decide to drink a Diet Coke before the podcast, so I'm not going to Rick and Morty this up by burping everywhere. So a lot's changed. The Atom proposal from Richard Smith, combined with a bunch of other feedback, resulted in us getting the Bellevue compromise, which led to merged modules. We've added a few more things since then. Specifically, module is going to be a context-sensitive keyword. Hallelujah. I'm so excited. Like, Nathan Sidwell made a really good argument, which was, if we're going to make the argument that we can't use await as a keyword and we have to make it co-await, then why are we going to make module be a required keyword when it's used like 3 to 4 more times more on GitHub as a variable name? It doesn't make sense. So he had some rules. He figured out how to make it context sensitive. That then also came into contact with the new module preamble. So we still have a preamble. The preamble can end early if you are depending on say preprocessor definitions that are from something in what's now called the global module fragment. So we have a few. Yeah, there's a lot to it. Merge modules is very large, but it's better in my opinion because we now have this thing called a module fragment. So a module fragment is just a subset of a module. It doesn't mean it is a submodule. It is just a part of the purview of a module.
Partial classes, kind of?
Sort of. It's like a partial module, except that it has to be included in that group when you go to create that final exported module. So modules scopes have now gone from like, here's a module of both an interface and implementation, and they can be like, end-to-end files. It is now, here are your end files for that module fragment. And or not module fragment, for that module. And if you don't have all of them, then it's going to not work correctly.
So a bunch of fragments make a whole.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
And then we also have something called the global module fragment. And that's basically the legacy preambles. That's where you can put all your includes and all that stuff like that. So the layout of a file now goes module, I believe, semicolon, and that's it. And then you put your includes, defines, whatever you need there. And then you put export module, your module name, and then you're good to go. You can also skip all of that and just put export module, your module name. So that global module fragment becomes optional. And this is a good compromise. I'm not like 100% happy about this, obviously, because it's not perfect. But nothing's going to be with this because there's so many different opinions on this stuff. But also, like, this is just from a cursory glance at merge modules. It's like 120 pages. And I, can't keep it all in my head. I'm not on the core working group, so I can't just focus on that entirely. But from a cursory glance and having been at San Diego, it's shaping up to be really great. It would be even better if we could add a paper that I wrote called Implicit Module Partition Lookup, which Richard Smith and Hubert Tong gave me some feedback on at San Diego. So I'm going to have to change some of the wording for it, and we may be able to actually get it in 420, even though it was technically put off of the off of the schedule for San Diego, but it's basically P1302 is the number, but it's basically a way to say, here's a directory or some module container, and you just throw that at your compiler, and you're done. And that will look for a specific entry point that you've specified, and that will be your module. So that's everything in there. And so it will only pull in the fragments that you've imported in there, but it basically says, like, the compiler does not become a build system, but it does become a lookup system for that specific module. The build system is still responsible for actually compiling the object files, but the compiler will still be able to actually generate the final, exported module interface that everything would use. The build system is still responsible for finding the actual imports that are not implicit module partitions. There's like a lot to it, and you have to know like where merged modules are right now and where they're going to be to like fully understand like the full scope of it, because modules are extremely complex, and that's because we have things like ZOS to worry about and VMS and other older operating systems. This ended up not going off too well with people at San Diego, but we may have a way around that, simply because we haven't taken any official straw polls. A lot of people have different opinions on things. Nathan Sewell, says that, like, well, why don't we just make GCC open a Unix socket to your build system, and your build system will be a Unix socket server. And that sounds terrifying to me, personally, because I don't want to have to worry about CVEs coming in for my build system.
Right.
I don't want to worry about, like, someone accidentally bound this TCP socket for Windows 7 because it had to work on Windows 7 or something like that. Someone ported this to Windows XP, and which doesn't have Unix sockets, and oops, now all this person's, this machine was compromised, and now a bunch of people's personal information was out there because CMake wasn't expecting it to be bound to the internet or something like that. It's not, that doesn't sound like a good idea to me. Having directories, though, every OS has a directory. Even DOS has directories. And P1302 has two approaches. I'm going to be dropping the hierarchy one as the primary example, and instead of going with the splayed one, which is you just have a directory, and you just have to have one hierarchy deep. And every OS in pretty much our history has a one-level hierarchy at the very least. Even ZOS supports this to some degree. So if ZOS can do it, then anything is possible, right? So that's the path I would like to take it in. This would also mean that, like, Boris doesn't have to rewrite all of build 2. Meson doesn't have to do a whole bunch of work to get it working. CMake doesn't have to do a whole bunch of work. Your make files will still technically work because make will read the timestamps from directories just fine. Ninja will work just fine as well. Fast build will still work. You can still tunnel these things across the network through Ice Cream or DistCC or whatever you want to use, SC cache, C cache, whatever. I spent like a lot of time thinking this stuff through from February of last year till September, when I presented the idea to Richard, and he was like, "This sounds interesting." So and it's a very simple lookup system without it actually having any like real huge performance hits, right? Because, like, does it make sense to have the compiler open a socket and then send strings across this socket instead of it just saying, hey, this file that you parsed out, just keep reading more files? Like, it just makes sense to me. Like, right. It's already launched. Right. It's already reading stuff in. Like, have it just keep reading that stuff. It just seems like it would be more performant, especially on systems where launching a process is a very expensive operation, like Windows. Right. So, so that's the gist of it for modules, I guess. There's a lot more involved, and, like, I'm sure some people like Matthias Stern are just like shaking their heads like, no, we just need precompiled headers. But I think that if I just recently redesigned my website, so I now finally have the time to, like, sit down and write this stuff out. So I'm going to be writing a very, very long post on what modules are, what you can do with them, and why we actually do need P1302. Because otherwise we're going to end up with, like, vendor lock-in, where it's like, okay, well, our module system only works with GCC, this module system only works with Clang, this one only works with Bazel, this one only works with Blaze, this one only works with CMake, this one only works with, build 2. We don't want vendor lock-in, right? Like, you want to be able to move between these build systems freely, and this will help with tooling, especially if game developers care about this stuff, which they should. So that's just the meat of the matter, if you will. So
Okay.
yeah. And then there was like one other thing. Oh yeah, so future stuff that I'm tackling also, and I will hopefully have 1 or 2 papers available for Kona. Are so in addition to the inline module partitions being used for basically a global static if token soup, I discussed what's the word, conditional imports with Adam from MongoDB, and we came up with a brief syntax. We're going to try some Triboolean logic with it to replicate the preprocessor, while also keeping it simple for build systems to be able to process that stuff and do pre-processing if they need to. And there's that. There's also automatic inclusion of everything into a namespace, as well as automatic usings on import. This is all like, I'm just throwing words out here, but this is stuff that people will hopefully be able to look forward to, and I will hopefully go over in a post in the future. And I think that's about it. The biggest hurdle I think that we're going to have going forward is going to be the std embed issue with dependencies. It's currently like one of the largest mailing list or SG15 mailing list threads that we've had running, which that list is usually kind of dead, and it's been pretty lively lately thanks to that discussion. So I'm not going to make a statement either way. I did help the PhD with some of the syntax that we wouldn't step on each other's toes, as well as like kind of keeping it what's the word, like uniform with the approach that I'm going to be taking. That may end up getting it voted down as a result, which I feel kind of bad for if that's the case. But the dependency issue is a big one and will matter for these upcoming meetings. So
okay,
yeah,
I'm glad to know that you have a better opinion about modules, and you think it will be making it into C++20?
I don't know, because there are a lot of people that have negative opinions on it. However, those opinions are based off of where the modules TS was, as well as the add-on proposal being separate, and just a lot of people not being in the room when other things were discussed. So when we were talking about the global module fragment, a lot of things were brought up, and I was like, nah, I'm like super against this. And then like someone else explained it to me in a different way, and I was like, oh, why didn't they just say that instead? Like, it would have made more sense, and I would have been in favor of it, and I wouldn't have raised my hand as SA, strongly against in that moment. And then like been like just angry the whole time until someone explained it to me. I think some of it's just like, it's a very large paper, merged modules. It's larger than Atom, and it's larger than the modules TS. And I'm glad that some stuff got kicked out of the modules TS. Honestly, like extern module was not a good idea. It would have allowed recursively dependent modules. Recursively dependencies are not a good idea in build systems. You don't want that. Yeah. And that would have permitted that. And I'm glad that removed it. Did I want everything that was in the Atom proposal? Not really, no. But I like where this compromise. It's a very precarious compromise. But if merged modules make it in at Kona, then the final vote will be in Cologne. Our last chance to get them in for the C++20 standard will be in Cologne, which is the...
When is that?
That is immediately after Kona. Well, not immediately after Kona, but it's the next meeting after Kona,
so
which I believe is June-ish.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. I'm hoping to go to that, but if it interferes with, the Bay Area Pride celebrations that weekend, I'm not going to go. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. Well, it's been great talking to you again, Izzy.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been a treat.
Well, and since you said you're no longer with your last job, are you currently looking for work? Any plug that you want to get in real quick? Or
yeah, I mean, so I am currently contracting. That may turn into something full time, but if something better comes along, anything remote, hit me up on Twitter. My DMs are not open. Just tweet at me though, and I will open a DM for you. It's kind of a
so if anyone is looking to hire you, send you a message.
Send me a message. Hit me up in some way. We'll talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks, Izzy.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for listening in as we chat about C++. We'd love to hear what you think of the podcast. Please let us know if we're discussing the stuff you're interested in, or if you have a suggestion for a topic, we'd love to hear about that too. You can email all your thoughts to feedback@cppcast.com. We'd also appreciate if you can like CppCast on Facebook and follow CppCast on Twitter. You can also follow me at Rob W. Irving and Jason at Lefticus on Twitter. We'd also like to thank all our patrons who help support the show through Patreon. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/cppcast. And of course, you can find all that info and the show notes on the podcast website at cppcast.com. Theme music for this episode was provided by podcastthemes.com. Site at cppcast.com. Theme music for this episode was provided by podcastthemes.com.